What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of Behind the Facade. So I'm going to do a very short intro today because I'm actually not in the studio. As you can see, I'm in Malahide Castle here in North Dublin, and it's absolutely beautiful. It's about as far from where our guest today is having a conversation with me from. We're talking with Brian Grimes. Now, Brian is an entrepreneur, real estate entrepreneur, general contractor, developer. He's all of that. The guy is in his mid-30s now, but has got a really interesting story and is very active in the gut renovation, as he calls it, which is where you buy property and it requires complete rebuild or strip down to the very sort of basic structure. And he's done 300 of them, and everything that he does, he keeps for his own passive income portfolio. So very interesting discussion. I think you're going to get a lot of value from this. And so without further ado, my conversation with Brian Grimes. You're listening to Behind the Facade, and I'm your host, Gavin J. Gallagher. On this podcast, I explore the mental and emotional game often playing out subconsciously, both in your mind and the mind of everyone else in the real estate or property investment market. The key to success in this game is to master your mindset and your behavior, to take control of your thoughts, your emotions, and most importantly, your ego. Welcome to the show. Brian Grimes, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Brian, we've just figured out that we weren't recording, so I'm going to spill the beans and admit to it. That's the first rookie mistake I've made in my podcast. We were talking about 9/11, and we won't go back over old history, but obviously yesterday was 9/11. You're based in the Bronx now, having studied in Columbia. You're originally from Philadelphia. So I'd love to go and examine what exactly brought you into the property business. I mean, did you study anything to do with property when you were at Columbia?
I really didn't. I was an econ major, and for the econ majors, they kind of railroaded us all into investment banking. That was kind of what they recommended everybody go into. And I was always wanting to study lifestyle versus just like income and whatever the career path was. And when I saw the partners, I would always look at what are the partners doing? And they're working like 20-hour days, barely seeing their family. They're making great money, but it wasn't the lifestyle that I wanted. I wanted to be my own boss. My parents were both very entrepreneurial, as I was growing up. So I always wanted to do kind of my own thing. So I got into financial planning, went back to Philly. But I had friends that were in real estate, that were investing in real estate. One of my best friends had already picked up maybe 2 or 3 like Section 8 properties, which were the government voucher kind of housing properties where you could put in like a low income family and the government would pay the rent or a large portion of the rent.
Okay, you call that, back in Ireland here, we would call that housing assistance. Yeah. So
it's exactly. It's like a housing assistance program. Absolutely. So he was doing that. I remember being out we were at like a bar or a club, like when I was still in college, and he was a few years ahead of me. And he pulls out just like a knot of like 20s and hundreds. And I'm like, well, what is that? We're broke college kids. And he's like, oh, this is the rent money. So from that point, I knew, I want a piece of that. I need to get into whatever this is. So I was always studying it. And as I started working in financial planning, every dime I could save, I was saving to put into real estate and get my first deal and then, continue.
I think a lot of people can relate to what you've been saying about lifestyle there, because there's a huge amount. I mean, it's funny when you look at, Netflix series and stuff, there's Suits, and it has all these guys and it's very stylish, and, these lawyers working in the big firm in New York City. But the reality is so far from, those guys would be working like 80-hour weeks and stuff like that.
Oh, yeah.
They don't get home at all, let alone have time to go off and drink kind of expensive champagne and stuff. And so I think obviously the investment banking side that you're kind of being railroaded in college, that's exactly that same kind of lifestyle. It's working all around the clock. And you didn't want a piece of that. So I completely relate. And there's a lot of people that what the property industry really offers is that kind of passive income where you're bringing in the money regardless of whether you're putting in the hours or not. It comes in through rent. Obviously, you got to kind of manage a few balls in the air and things like that, but at least, I can understand the attraction. And in terms of, I mean, you're from Philadelphia, you moved to Columbia. Were you able to do anything in New York to start with, or did you have to kind of go back towards Philadelphia before you could start your career in as an investor?
I think like I had some really good mentors from Columbia, and one of my mentors, I went to him for principles. He was a commercial mortgage banker for Bank of America, and he, was doing commercial deals with like Jay-Z, Alicia Keys, and some big, celebrities. So he, he definitely had my ear, and still does. And I went to him for a principle to say, like, how can I stay safe investing? And he's just like, look, buy where you know, rent to who you know, and you'll always be successful. And I took that to mean, when I'm getting started, buy some properties in my backyard, like where I grew up, and rent to people that are from that same walk of life that I'm familiar with and comfortable with, and I would have success. So I knew I wanted to start in Philly because that was the market that I was the most familiar with. Also in New York, you're talking about a kind of top 5 market in the world.
Yeah.
So it's extremely expensive. There's a ton of cash buyers. You definitely have a better opportunity going to places like Philly or Baltimore or Cleveland or some of these what I would call sister cities. Like Philly is a sister city to New York because New Yorkers hate Boston. That's the next biggest city. They're not too fond of Connecticut either for whatever reason. So they love Philly. There's no real negative stigma there. So it being the sister city to New York, you have people who are going to Philly to get lower taxes, lower rents, lower cost of living. And it just seemed like a logical, next step.
I think you're absolutely right. I mean, the worst thing about investing in property is if you don't know what you're buying, you really are lining yourself up for a fall because it looks like good value to you from your perspective of wherever you're used to, but you could be buying at 10%, 15% over the market. Absolutely. Yeah. Very interesting. And and so tell us, I saw I was looking through your LinkedIn and you worked in Bridgewater, which obviously that's Ray Dalio's firm originally. And so, I mean, did you find anything of value working in a big firm like that when you started your own thing, or were you just kind of biding your time waiting to get to running your own business?
I did a bunch of things. So when I was working at Bridgewater, I was doing high net worth asset management. We were managing maybe 1.3 billion for about 300 families, privately wealthy families. And that was eye opening to see, how millionaires were living. Some millionaires were paycheck to paycheck, believe it or not. Others were very frugal and saved money. So it's interesting to kind of see that and experience that. I left there and went to a startup, Policy Genius, where we were selling insurance direct to consumer all over the internet, all across the country. And that was shaking up the insurance industry. And that was really cool. I was kind of running the call center there, training the new agents and, on the phone directly with the consumers. And that was a lot of fun. And everywhere I worked, I always tried to just study whoever was in control of the company. How are they building it? If there was like a two-headed partnership, how did that partnership work? How are they managing the day-to-day? When I got to work at the startup, I got to see behind the veil of a company. What's really behind this engine? There's an engineering team. There's a marketing team. There's product managers. Getting to see that was preparing me to start my own thing. So I always had it in my mind that I was going to work until I could save up enough money to buy enough properties to just break free from the 9-to-5. And I ended up retiring kind of from the 9-to-5 at age 30.
Nice one. And in terms of, the step to get to that, what most people do is they'll buy a couple and then they'll kind of they'll get to a kind of point where there's enough money kind of coming in that you can break away. Did you do that like through bootstrapping, or did you raise money from investors, or how did you kind of get yourself to that breakaway point?
It was definitely bootstrapping, and I don't know that I quite hit the breakaway point that we love to hit. Two things happened to me. I call it, one is the Clark Kent Superman syndrome, and this will happen before you hit breakaway speed. What happens is you're an employee by day and a boss by night or by lunch break. So you get two or three properties and you quickly become a boss. You're an owner, and there's this different attitude and energy of that. And then you start to feel like an imposter because you're putting on the glasses and the suit and you're going in and pretending to be an employee. And you're talking to your boss at the time, and they're like, well, I'm smarter than you. I'm the boss. I deal with all this. And you're like, well, I'm a boss too. And it one of those egos ultimately wins out. It's usually the Superman that beats up the Clark Kent energy. And then you're ready at that point. You can no longer stand pretending and being an imposter. So that happened. And also, when I was at the startup, I had built up the business to the point where it needed me. So I started to get into heavy gut renovation. And I knew if I didn't leave and focus full time on this gut renovation, because there were so many balls in the air, it was going to fail. So there was no doubt in my mind that I had to go all in, or it was definitely going to fail. So I decided, well, I can always get another 9 to 5, job with my background. I better go for this now while I'm young, while I have the energy.
Yeah. So tell us, you did manage a lot of renovations, but did you start out like that, or tell us the progression? Did you start with 1 or 5, or how did you kind of progress through to the point where you were doing hundreds of them?
Yeah, I started how most of us start, which is like turnkey. So I started off turnkey doing like a FHA house hack, just
What's
putting down
FHA? What?
FHA in the States is like a first time home buyer's mortgage, where you can put down 3.5% down and get a property. So you can do this on anything from 1 to a 4 family property. So you can go out and get a quadplex with 3.5% down. And that allows you to get a multi and just get a lot of leverage so that you can try to build up cash flow, maybe live in one unit, rent out the other units, and try to live for free or get paid to live in your own property. And that's usually done on move-in ready turnkey properties. Turnkey meaning you just sweep the floors, put some paint on the walls, and hand over the keys and start collecting rent. And that's what I did. My first deal, I was cash flowing about $1,000 a month off that first deal. I only put $5,000 into the deal. So I got all my money back in 5 months. And then I was kind of off and running. Got another duplex kind of from a bank owned. It just needed like sheetrock and small touch ups. These were like cosmetic, and that was part of the evolution. Then I went down to Baltimore and I did a gut renovation. I thought it was going to be cosmetic, but it's like you start pulling back the walls and it's like, the money pit. So you get into one of these deals, which was good. It was all cash. So it was more comfortable than like if you're doing a hard money loan. But I learned that process. Then I was ready to take on Philly full gut. And when I got to Philly, I bought 3 shells. One was a tear down. One was a burnout, like the whole second floor just burn out, and one was just a regular shell. And the tear down was like this: the roof was on the first floor is in the basement, and there's just like a pit of tires and water. And it was just like, it was just
start again. Yeah.
Oh yeah, it was down to the 4 walls, full gut, get everything out and rebuild it from scratch. And I went through that process. I had a contractor run off with $40,000 in that project. Had to, pick up the pieces and say, look, I better get really serious about this, or this isn't going to last too long and I'll be right back at the desk job. And I just got, really laser focused on it and started to build into that, build a small construction crew, become my own GC, and learn as I go. We call it building the plane while you're flying it, type of a philosophy. And it just, there's a series, whenever you're doing something like this from scratch without mentorship, which is not what I would recommend. The School of Hard Knocks is 100 times more expensive than mentorship.
Yeah.
When you're doing this, there's a series of what I call needle threads. So you're going to run out of money if you have no idea what you're doing and no mentorship. You're going to run out of money and go to E. And if you're lucky, you'll connect with a lender who will come and fund the deal or make things happen. And you'll go through series after series of needle thread moments where it's like, it's all caving in. It's all going to collapse. Oh, somebody comes in with a bag of cash and we're back and we're running. It's part of that startup type of energy. But that was the iteration of just going through and building property after property, getting better, getting more crews and more contractors to believe in the mission, and just doing it a deal at a time, ultimately scaling up to cut costs down. And that was why I scaled it, was I started to see the savings at higher volumes. So I started to scale.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you that. I mean, just for anyone who's listening who's not familiar with the term, when you say you became your own GC, you mean a general contractor.
Yeah.
So do you have, I mean, would you consider yourself to be now a general contractor as well as a property investor?
I would consider myself to be a developer. It's kind of what I call it. And as part of that, you need you need almost every discipline. And that's the unique part. I kind of looked at real estate and I said, well, who makes all the money in real estate? Because that's who I want to be. So then you just follow the money. Who writes all the checks? Well, the developer pays the contractors. They pay the lenders. They, pay for all the rehab, all the materials, they're paying everybody. The insurance man, they're just paying everybody. So they must be making all the money, right? Or how could they pay everybody? So I just kept it really that simple and kind of got into that mindset where, as the developer, you have to know as much as the GC, as much as the lender, as much as the insurance broker, as much as the realtor. You kind of have to know all of these disciplines to be able to navigate successfully.
Do you manage the properties yourself, or do you outsource that?
I've done both, right? So my recommendation to people who are thinking about that, which one do I go with and why and when? I recommend going with property management first. So a lot of people like to self-manage when they're small and they think, when I get big enough, I'll hire property management.
Yeah.
That never works. Here's why it doesn't work. When you build a business, you need to build in a business that can support leverage in other people. If you build a business that requires you to self-manage to be profitable, you're never going to be comfortable cutting the check, even as you get bigger, because you never built that model with that cost and expense of property management in mind. Right. You're also going to burn out before you get there. Because I've seen so many people, there's like this glass ceiling of 10 properties. People get up, they get 10 properties and they're like, I'm right here. I got 10, I'm cash flowing. And before you know it, they're down to 5, 4, 3, because they can't keep up with the demand of the self-management. Once that volume gets to a certain level, there's too many tenants, too many headaches. So I recommend property management first. And then as you get to a certain scale, the cost of property management, let's say you had $20,000 a month coming in, that 10% of $2,000 a month, you could hire a virtual assistant from Bogota, Colombia, from Mexico City to answer the phone and send out the contractors and manage the entire operation. So then it becomes cheaper to hire VAs and manage yourself. Yeah.
No, I think it's a great point. And that's why I was asking, because there's only so many things that you can do yourself. There's only so many hours in the day. And if you're doing the general contracting as well, you're kind of like, there's a lot of balls in the air that you're trying to.
Too much.
Yeah. Spinning plates, that. Yeah. So tell us, I mean, you said then that you decided to scale. I mean, how did you go about scaling? Did you bring in external investors, or did you just borrow and leverage yourself up?
More leverage. The lenders are cheaper than the investors to a degree. The bank has so much money that it doesn't know what to do with, that it's just substantially cheaper as long as you can move at the profit speed. So you can't be in a full gut renovation for 8 months. You have to get it down to like 3 months. So there's a bit of honing that happens before you can scale. But once you, how do you scale is with volume. So I look at, you look at the business and you think like, if you have children, you want to make more food and have more food in your house, especially if you have like young boys, then they can eat. You have
Yeah,
to have more or they're going to eat everything.
yeah,
The less food you have, the hungrier they're going to get. They're going to eat through all of it. So with deals, you want to have more deals than your contractors can work their way through at all times. Because once you have that, now you have a model where you can get people to buy into working with you long term. You're not the one deal guy, you're the volume guy, and the volume guy gets volume discounts and gets contractors who buy in because they don't want to chase the next deal. They want to know that the next deal is always there. And once we get into this one, there will be five more.
and you
So
become the big client who is like, let's look after this guy because he's going to give us the next deal.
well, there's a lot more to lose, right? Because now you're not just losing this deal, you're losing the next 20. So you build the deals with the volume. It's very attractive to a lender as well, because lenders don't like new people. They like dealing with existing relationships that are proven. So if they can go to you and you can bring 100 deals in a year, well, then they don't have to go to 100 of you to bring in one deal a year. It's much
Yeah,
easier of a business relationship. So you can set that up with a lender, bring in the volume. And then once you have the volume, you can pretty much start to scale. And how you scale is you get a warehouse. A warehouse might cost you $3,000 a month in a major city. When I got my warehouse, $3,000 a month, I was saving $50,000 to $60,000 a month running that scale just from having the warehouse, because you can order your materials in bulk from China, and now you're saving 40% on your materials, and
yeah,
that's real money. The savings is like, it's real. It will impact your bottom line. You get trucks, your own dump trucks, which in the States you could bonus depreciate in year one. If I got a dump truck for $50,000, I could write it off the entire 50,000 on taxes this year. So you're incentivized to go out and build capital and infrastructure. So you get a couple dump trucks, you get some delivery drivers who can get the materials from the warehouse to the jobs faster. So they're not
yeah.
standing at Home Depot or waiting in line and buying and doing. So you start to create all of these efficiencies that make you faster, and the speed is the money. So scaling started to save, easily 30 to 40% on entire jobs. So you're knocking your construction costs down by $30,000, $40,000 a deal, and then you're going to run 100 deals a year. That's
Yeah.
3 to 4 million right there in savings that will turn into cash actually in the bank, because you're not burning through it.
And is there a risk that you learn to run before you can walk, and that you scale a little bit too quickly, and that your next minute you don't have the cash to fund all of the stuff that's happening simultaneously?
Absolutely. There's always that risk of growing too much. You only want to, pigs get fat, hogs get slaughtered, right? You only want to grow at the right pace. And there is a pace where you can get greedy and try to run too fast because, the money is good and everything's kind of flowing. So you just want to keep your eye on the ball. You don't want to. This is why the perfect recipe is more deals than contractors, because your real expense is carrying the cost of construction and the
Yeah.
contractors. As long as that is managed and there's an appropriate amount of deal flow and budget within those deals to support your team, you're pretty much good. But there is a recipe. This is like, I would describe this like baking a cake without a exact like recipe book. Like, you have to feel it out, and then after a point you become like a chef. You have your own style and way of doing this. You're truly like an orchestrator
This is where being
of
an
construction.
entrepreneur helps. Like you're creative, and you can kind of you
Yeah,
can
you have to adapt. I mean, this is where working at the startup and understanding building the plane while you're flying it as a way of life. You start to just have your antennas up, and you're just constantly adjusting. I mean, your job really as a developer and a real estate investor is to put out fires all day
yeah,
at
yeah.
the highest level. That's your job, is to wake up and just see what the world throws at you and put it out. It's the ultimate reality TV. And one thing that you'll learn over the course of time, which is what I learned, is there's no issue that you'll face that you can't solve, because you'll build this muscle over the course of time, because you'll have thought you were going to fail or that you couldn't solve it so many times that and have come up with the solution and solved it, that you'll no longer believe that there's an issue you can't solve. So then the fear will go away and you'll just be able to execute and stay clear and kind of drive the ship.
Yeah, well, I mean, positive self-belief, as opposed to this kind of self-limiting beliefs that people have and they kind of hold themselves back.
Yeah.
That's really, I mean, that's some of the stuff that we like to talk about here on the show is mindset related. And before we get on to that, I just wanted to ask you, have you got any tips for, you mentioned there the fact that you've got to find the deals, and that's the big thing for you.
Yeah.
I mean, going out and, looking at, properties that are coming up for sale and all that kind of stuff. Is there any kind of tips that you have for scaling the finding aspect? Do you go directly to the banks or, wholesale, or how are you going about that?
It's all about being in a position to cherry pick. So for me, it's like all of the above. They'll be like, do you go to the bank? Do you go to wholesalers? Do you go to direct to consumer? All of them, because I have to create an environment where I feel like I can cherry pick. So I need an overload of deals. I need people bringing me deals. I want every deal in this city to come across my desk, everyone. And then I can sit back and cherry pick the best deals. I need some boots on the ground. I need somebody who can go out and inspect a deal at a whim. It hit the market at 10. I need a guy who can be in that property at 10:30 with a camera, shooting videos of it, showing me what we're seeing, or if the floors are like this or this. And that speed, it's everything in real estate is speed. So even the speed of being able to get in the deal, this allows you to beat out all the mom and pop investors who are working a 9 to 5, who can't get to the deal till the weekend. So the best deals, I've actually gotten the best deals, believe it or not, on the MLS, like the public listings that everybody sees. I get pennies on the dollar deals there, because I learned that the best deals come on and off the market in anywhere from 24 to 48 hours. That's why most people never see them, because they're just on and off, on and off. And you have to get your speed up to that level. And how you get it is instant deal alerts and having a boots on the ground person who can run and see that deal quickly, get back to you with the information so that you can get out an offer. I've locked up deals in 10 hours, 8 hours of them hitting the market with different systems that I teach people how to do. And that's the difference. But it's all about deal overload. You want to get them from everywhere. You want every deal in your city or in your area coming across your desk. And then you want to cherry pick just the pennies on the dollar deals so that you're putting the most profitable deals in your pipeline.
Yeah. And so tell us, Brian, what does your team look like? You mentioned, getting boots on the ground and stuff like that. Describe your team in terms of the most important functions that you have, because that guy that you're sending in to look at the deal, that strikes me as an important person, because you can't make a bid on a property unless you have confidence in the person you're sending in.
Yeah. So I try to, these are all iterations as well. Like first you'll think I got to send in my head guy, right? My guy with 25 years experience. I need him to see every deal, but you can't really do that, can you? Because he's too important. You actually need him in the properties that you're building, overseeing the contractors that are actively building projects as you're scaling. So what you do is you get 2 layers. Most of my systems will have a basic system and then a fail-safe. And I've learned that from working high net worth, advisory, where you can't have something slip through the cracks. Like it's a $10 million client. It's just not going to work for us. So I'll have a guy who's just like my runner. He's kind of younger. He's good with the technology, with the smartphones. I'm going to have him run through the property, and he's going to show me everything. But what's really important is what he feels, because you can't feel the property through the video. So you can't necessarily feel the level changes or the softness of the floor or what's going on structurally. So I have him feeling it out, talking to me as he's walking through, talking to a level where if I closed my eyes and wasn't even looking, I could hear the property. Like I want to hear it. Now I'm in a position to actually put out a preliminary offer and lock up that deal with a small deposit with a window of maybe 4 to 5 days before that deposit goes hard. During that period, if I locked up this deal at a price point that I know is profitable, as long as there's nothing majorly wrong with this deal, then in that 4 to 5 day period, I'm going to send out my head guy. So now I've reduced the volume of deals that my head guy has to see. He only sees deals that are under contract, and he's serving as that final inspection point so that I don't make a mistake. And that's how you keep your speed, but also keep your control, your quality control. And that's an important iteration.
And the guy that you sent in, it just strikes me as, like you said it earlier, you're like the conductor of the orchestra here. You don't necessarily need to go and see the property yourself, but your head guy that you, 25 years, as long as he goes in and sees it, he probably know more than you would know, I guess.
Of course, so why have him? Why have anybody who in any role who you don't think is as smart or maybe even smarter than you? Maybe they don't have the vision of the total picture, but within their element, you want them to be, pretty sharp. So, no, absolutely. Like I'm going to trust him. I mean, I've built hundreds of properties I've never stepped foot in, and there's nothing wrong with that. I'm seeing every video. So I learned this very early in the business as I was scaling. When I had 4 deals going on at a time in Philly, I used to get in my car from New York, drive down to Philly, see every deal, shake hands, kiss babies, drive back and beat traffic, right? Then you get up to 8 deals and you go down and you still only saw 4.
Yeah.
And you're like, I can't get to the next level. I had to actually put the cameras and the inspectors and the different systems in place. Then I could sit back, air traffic control behind my computer. I could see 40 every day.
Yeah.
That was the scalability. So once I learned that, I started to understand how to properly inspect these properties and then get in the right people at the right times for the fail safe so that you can comfortably, navigate a deal. And once you've done, I say I've done over 300 full gut renovations at this point. Once you've done 100, you've kind of seen it all. Yeah. You've run into most of the issues. Everything else is just a repeat and replay of the original 100.
And tell me, Brian, in terms of the full gut, you finish, you rent it out. Are you hanging on to these properties or are you recycling them? Is it just so you just built up a big portfolio at this stage?
Yeah, you just build up a big portfolio. We call it flipping the house to yourself. So we're typically buying properties for 10, 20 cents on the dollar. We're investing 35, 40 cents on the dollar. So we're all in at like 65% of the after repair value. You can go to a 30-year mortgage lender. I know in the UK they're talking about like 50-year notes, which I think is going to be crazy if that rolls out. But you go to a long-term, we'll call it mortgage lender, you get a 75% mortgage on this property. So there's a 10% spread that you could get in a cash out refinance. And that allows you maybe some money to recycle and put into the next deal. And you just do that over and over and over again. And you're setting these properties up so that the rents cover the mortgage and produce a little bit of cash flow. And it's a question of doing it, like you said, at the right speed, at the right pace. So you're not too far ahead or too far behind. And just building up a consistent portfolio of cash flow.
Yeah, I mean, that's the ideal way to it, because now you've got the passive income coming in, it's paying down the mortgages. Now, the only thing is, and maybe we can kind of go on to this for a moment, is just now that rates are starting to rise, what's that doing? Like you're nodding your head. It is that's going to throw a spanner in the works, presumably, in terms of the speed that you can operate at now. So how are you combating the rise in rates, and where do you see it all kind of playing out?
Well, I see it playing out two areas. So I'll answer it in sequence. How have I been combating it? So even before rates started rising, I started getting more creative in the iterations in terms of how do I produce more out of less? How do I get more cash flow out of every asset? And one strategy was co-living. So co-living, because I'm doing full gut renovation anyway, I started to break down like a 3-bed, 1-bath starter home. And you blow it up to the 4 walls, rebuild it as 3 beds, 3 baths. Everybody just shares like the kitchen and the small like eat-in living room, eat-in kitchen type of area. And each one of those bedrooms is like a master suite, has its own bathroom. You can only get two through the bedroom. You could rent each one of those suites in a city like Philly for $750 a month, whereas that 3-bed, 1-bath would rent for $1,250 a month. This co-living property will rent for $2,250 a month. So that's an extra $1,000 of cash flow. So when you're doing stuff like that you're creating, you're creating excess cash flow to the point where only you could maybe do this strategy with co-living, whereas other people, the rates went up and they just can't cash flow anymore. I'm still cash flowing because I'm just a little bit, I believe in density. Just keep that in mind. Gentrification is kind of the word I've coined for it, but it's just adding density to neighborhoods and to properties is my philosophy there. In terms of where I think it's heading, things like the 50-year note or the 40-year note, mortgage notes. I think the banking industry is not just going to roll over, right? They're not just going to look at demand, fall through the floor and just say, oh, I guess the show is over. This is musical chairs to them and the show must go on. They're going to keep playing the music. They'll roll out a 60-year note if that's what it takes to produce cash flow and keep demand up. So I think we're already seeing the banking industry is going to adjust. They don't care. They're going to continue to adjust to meet demand. And that's just, economic supply and demand. They're going to find it. And if it's on a 40-year or a 45 or a 50-year note, they'll do it. And as an investor, if you're, cash flowing and putting a tenant in a house and the tenant's paying the mortgage off, you might not care if it's a 30 or 40 or 50-year note, as long as it's cash flowing and the numbers make sense and it's a fixed rate. So that's where I see things headed. Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. Well, just to go back on what you were talking about, I think that there is what you call it co-living, but what we call it here is HMO, and that's a house of multiple occupants. And it's something that I'm actually seeing an awful lot more of. I was just with a friend on Monday last week, and we were visiting one of his properties, and he bought a place that started out as a 3-bedroom home, and he extended out the rear and he went up into the attic. And so it's now a 7-bedroom home, but the 7 beds, each of them has its own bathroom.
Nice.
And he even went and he put in a small in some of them, there's a little kitchenette. So it has a microwave and a sink.
And a hot plate. And
a hot plate, exactly. And what's really interesting is that he's managed to go and find a corporate tenant that will rent all 7 of the bedrooms for their what they're trying to do nowadays, obviously, is recruit staff and stuff. And the big issue that they're having is staff can't get accommodation. So they're taking the entire house and they can now allocate, you need a room, come on, join our workforce. We can actually also provide you with accommodation. So it's an interesting one. And what's really interesting, though, is that it's like the numbers that you said. The house itself would only rent for $1,200, but you're getting 3 rooms at $750. And this is exactly the kind of numbers that this thing works out at. And so what actually, I've been looking at this from the point of view of, if you're getting creative like that, then the increased rates could actually be an advantage to somebody like you who has a creative kind of way of doing this, because you can go in, you can do this to a house, whereas everyone else sees the house, you can only get $1,200 and the mortgage is now greater than that. But you can see it and go, no, there's 2,250 to get out of that property. And so, it's still a good deal. So you can probably find that you can actually drive a harder bargain now with the sellers as well.
Exactly. The further you can see beyond the competition, the harder you can negotiate. It just gives you a unfair or competitive advantage, depending on how you want to look at it.
Brian, normally what I like to do is get into kind of some sort of mindset stuff. And I just wanted to kind of ask you in terms of, the habits and behaviors that you have adopted that you think have been most contributory towards the success that you've had. Like, is there any particular things that you think are really, really critical towards success?
I think being fearless is crucial. And there's levels to being fearless. You don't want to not have a pulse. You don't want to not recognize like risk, right? because then you're just being delusional. So you have to know that the risk is there. You just have to do it anyway at times and understand that you're building a muscle. So definitely working through becoming comfortable being uncomfortable, like which is part of growth as a developer, is truly um, understanding that you've done more with less before, and you've gotten through hardship before, and that you'll figure it out. You know, hardship is the predecessor of innovation. So
Yeah.
you kind of need it to innovate and to get to the next level. So we need that. If we don't have that, we're kind of staying stagnant. So there's definitely a good degree of fearlessness involved. But I think my fearlessness was truly built from a financial standpoint. Um, when I first started working financial planning out of college, I was 100% commission, 25 years old, 24, 25, 100% commission, no salary, working in sales, cold calling. I grew rhino skin. You know,
Yeah.
I just, after a point when you survive that type of a gauntlet with a 90% failure rate, you develop a different type of a muscle where you learn things like there's a 2-month delay on your energy. So if you're working at anything, you're not really going to see the benefits or the results for a couple of months, unless you're doing a 9 to 5. You get paid right away. But when you're an entrepreneur, it's usually a couple of months before you start to see the financial rewards for it. So going through that and kind of understanding that, and just not having a salary to depend on so early, like when I was getting started, it built up my fearlessness from a financial standpoint to, I would say, the ultimate level, to where I know how money is made, and money is made from energy. If I apply my energy to anything and my focus, I'll produce money at it. Like I trust that. I know that for a fact because I've lived it so many times. So then the question becomes, what do you want to focus on, and how big do you want to grow it? And is it something that, you know, resonates with you on multiple levels? But it's definitely all wrapped in this fearlessness and not being afraid to go out. I think one last part of fearlessness is choosing what you're afraid of is also part of fearlessness. So I'm more afraid, or I became more afraid of staying at the 9 to 5 than even failing in being an entrepreneur. I was more afraid to not try than to go out and actually fail.
Yeah.
You know, it was more of a horrifying, because I'm looking at the ultimate, you know, when I'm 50, when I'm 55, I'm looking 20, 30 years out, and I'm like, I'm afraid of that. I'm going to go over here. Even if I fail, at least I can say I went after it and I got knocked out, you know, like, so
Yeah.
choosing your fears or putting your fears in perspective is huge. And the last thing I'll say about fear is everything's scarier in your head.
Yeah.
And you have to understand that about fear. Why is it scarier in your head? Because there's nothing you can do about it. It's not in reality. In reality, when your house catches on fire, you can grab some water and put it out. In your head, there's nothing you can do because it's not real yet. So as some of your biggest fears in real estate happen, but they happen in reality, a minute at a time, a second at a time, and you can sit back and react and adjust and reflect. It starts to take the fear away because it was scarier in your head. And the more you see that and live through it, the less impressed you are by your perceived fears of things. You just know they're not going to be that scary in reality. I'll get through it like everything else.
Yeah, there's a confidence there for sure. And
Yeah.
See that. Brian, we're getting close to wrapping up, but there's something that I have to ask you. And you'll probably get this asked a bit, but did you ever play basketball with anyone famous?
Yeah. No, so well, a lot of famous guys, I would say, but I don't know anybody more famous. You know, my first high school game, and I was nationally ranked at this time coming in the high school. I was, you know, top 10 in the country,
Wow.
about 6'4", 6'5". You know, I was on a team with a bunch of All-Americans who were, you know, 7 feet, 6'7", 6'8", going to Duke, Vanderbilt, University of Florida, just all-star studs. Our first game, they flew us out to Akron University to play LeBron James.
Wow.
For the LeBron fans, which I'm a LeBronite, I would say. And I mean, he was just insane. And this was during a time, framing it once again, where, you know, YouTube wasn't built out yet. People were coming off a dial-up. Like you couldn't just go out and see like endless clips of this guy and who he was. You had no idea who this guy was until you got on the court with him and played. And he was absolutely insane. And the environment was, I mean, just sold out. It was absurd. It was it was bigger than some NBA games in terms of the intensity and the energy in the environment. So that was definitely an experience. And that year we played a ton of good people all over the country. But LeBron was definitely somebody who over the years has proven greatness like over and over again at every level.
And it must be a great inspiration for you, like just to see the platform that he's created for himself nowadays. I mean, he's just he is a business like nowadays, like incredible.
Well, he was a business then, which was that was the scary, the strange part is he was a business then. He was at not only a different level physically, but definitely mentally. The pressure he was under, but also the performance behind that. Like he knew the stakes. He was, with professional trainers and different things at a very early age. So, but no, his platform now is incredible. I mean, he's never missed a beat in my opinion. And even at that level, when he was in high school, I mean, he was ready to play pro by his junior year of high school. I mean, he was better than everybody in college and then a lot of pros already. He was ridiculous.
What I know about him, because I wouldn't know as much about him as you do, but what I've noticed is there's a kind of a respect that the guy has for the people around him and stuff. And what's interesting though is he seems to be very grounded and sure-footed, and he doesn't feel that he has to live up to this lifestyle. And unfortunately, I see that with big sports stars, so many of them, they go off and they feel like they have to live this lifestyle that to show off, I guess, how much money they earn. And I remember reading this figure that was really, really shocking. And it was that something like 70% of NBA players, national football players.
They go broke.
They end up broke within a couple of years of retirement. And it's incredible that they can make so much money and yet burn through it because they have no kind of financial wherewithal.
Yeah. Well, you don't get it. It's very difficult. Like as a professional athlete or athlete at these levels, you're almost like something else. Like you don't view yourself as a civilian. Like you're different, and you truly are. And everyone treats you that way. And when that happens, there's a stunted growth that happens. So whenever that transformation happens, that's how old you are. You could be 38, but if you made it to the NBA at 18, 19, you're 19 mentally, because that's when you stop growing. And when you have a bunch of yes men around you, people who are there to, collect a check, you're not really like learning at the same time. You also take the average person. Most of us make major financial mistakes all throughout our life, but we have our highest earning years in our 50s. And we're not making all that money in our 20s. For the athlete, they're making all the money when they're most likely to make the biggest financial mistakes. And then when they're the older and wiser, they're making, they can't even make anything, right? So it's a paradox flip, which is almost set up to design. And then if there's somebody like me with real financial, acumen, who's managed money for millionaires, and then all the people who are trying to kind of rob these guys or mooch off of them, they're going to keep me as far away as possible, right? They don't want me talking to them and telling them, look, put it in real estate, do this, do that, get a whole life policy, overfunded, non-MEC. They don't want me telling them what millionaires are doing to set up legacy and set up their families, because they want, then they would say, oh, well, I don't need this 10-man entourage, do I? That's not going to do anything for me. Yeah.
I've read the stories about Mike Tyson, and when he was at the top of his game, and he'd have this entourage, and he'd buy them all the newest BMWs and stuff like that, and just like blew through millions. Brian, we're coming to the end of our conversation. I wanted to ask you. I ask all my guests the best advice. Looking back, you're still a young man, and so it's I'm not gonna. Normally, what I ask is, knowing now what you know, if you were to sort of speak to yourself as an 18-year-old, is there advice that you would give yourself, your 18-year-old self that at the time you wouldn't have thought was the case?
Yeah, I would say I would have probably gotten into real estate sooner. I would say you're never too young to get into this stuff. A lot of us just aren't exposed to it. Even like trading the markets, getting into crypto and learning about this stuff. You're not too young. I hear that a lot from people who reach out to me and they're like, Brian, I want to learn, I want to get into real estate. I just feel like I'm too young. And I'm like, look, when you're 18, 19, you got all the energy. You can go out and do a 22-hour day, sleep 2 hours, take a nap, and do it again. I can't at 35. At 55, you sure as heck can't, right?
Yeah.
So you have all the energy to go out and go after this thing. That's when you want to take advantage of it. That's the other paradox where we lose is we think we're going to go for our dreams later. And then by the time we go for them, we don't have the energy to go for them. Go for them early, fail early, and you can always go back.
And also the obligations of having family to look after.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. Having the kids and all of those things, which luckily I had mentors who were telling me this stuff when I was 25. Like, look, I'm 35 now. You better get your CFP. You better study and do this now because I got 3 kids, and trust me, you can't do it with these kids hanging on you. It's just a different ball game. But I had great mentors.
Yeah, it's a big thing having a good mentor behind you. Brian, thanks so much for your time. Can you just, if somebody wanted to check out a little bit more about you, what's the best place to find you more about you and connect with you?
Yeah, YouTube. You can find me on YouTube. Brian Loves Cash Flow, and that's easy to remember because I love cash flow. So you can find me on YouTube, Instagram, Brian Grimes _247 CFU for the 24/7 Cash Flow University. You can find me on LinkedIn, Brian Grimes. We have some free trainings for you guys. It's all backlinked through any of those channels. www.workwithgrimes.com /cashflow, workwithgrimes.com /cashflow. And we're helping people from all over the country, even outside of the country. We have a bunch of Canadians that are, in our course that are investing in the US, learning how to invest out of town and put their money where it goes further. Like I do, I invest all outside of New York. Baltimore, Philly, Jersey, Delaware, Texas. I just put my money where it goes further, and that's what I recommend everybody else do. Even if you're priced out in London, you want to invest in the United States, definitely tap in wherever you're at in the world. You can definitely do real estate today through technology, like I do.
Sure. All right, Brian, much appreciated. Thanks for all your time, and I really enjoyed our conversation today.
Likewise, appreciate it.
Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of Behind the Facade. If you enjoyed that episode or if you found it useful in any way, please take a moment to leave a review over on iTunes if you're listening in on the podcast. If you're listening or you're watching in on the YouTube channel, then maybe you can leave us a like. And if you can't do any of those things, maybe just share the episode out with somebody you think would find it useful. If you have any questions or topics you'd like me to cover, send me a message through the Facebook community is probably the best one to go for. That is called Behind the Facade Community. Alternatively, you'll find me on social media. My handle is Gavin J. Gallagher. And as you would expect, I have a website that has the same name, gavinjgallagher.com. If you go in there, you can join the email list. You can add yourself in there, and you can find out what's going on the various projects that I am working on. All right, guys, hope you enjoyed this one. Speak to you again next week.